Welcome back to Restoring Sean. Today we are in episode 17 and moving right along with the known history of the ranch, the game plan of what I would be doing with the house, and then a few quick oh shit things that needed to be resolved immediately, else
Grew up Chocolate Creek without a popsicle stick!
If you're new to the channel, I post a new video every Wednesday morning where I do some sort of a crash into the work that went into restoring my second house, the ranch. All opinions are my own, never assume I have the correct answer. And did you know, my most prized possession is this ring that was given to me by a girl named Mandy 24 years ago when we were freshmen in high school. It's just a cheap ring from American Eagle. I never leave the house without it, and I based my entire book series on it. Now you know. Let's get started. Quick sidebar with the new location in the house of where I'm filming these videos, it is very warm up here. So if you hear a humming sound in the background, it is the box fan that is off screen. And that is also why I'm wearing a tank top today, because I can't take the heat. Now that the hunt for the ranch and subsequently the purchase is out of the way, let's take today to talk about the known history behind the house, or at least the history that I know of, which admittedly isn't a lot. And let me just full stop here. I'm going to apologize in advance for however I act about the ranch and Brooklyn Park. The house itself was fine, the neighborhood was fine, the city was fine. Any bullshit attitude that I have about it, it's because of how my time living here unfolded, and that's entirely on me and the cosmic ways in which I allowed myself to be manipulated. So, that's that. Now let's talk shit. The ranch was originally built in 1973 in the Candlewood neighborhood of Brooklyn Park, Minnesota. There's nothing historically significant about Brooklyn Park or the neighborhood that I was living in that I know of, and I don't really care enough to deep dive into the history of Brooklyn Park. I did dive a little bit and I didn't find a lot, so I'm just gonna keep it out. I mentioned in the last video that there's the fancy Taco Bell Defy, and also Target headquarters. And besides that, I don't care. I also mentioned in the last video that the house was located down a private road. The street was made into a U shape and there were 19 houses around it. I cannot speak to all of the houses, but I believe most of them were built in the early 70s when mine was. I know one of them had burned down in the 90s, so that one was new construction. And there was another one that had been rebuilt at some point as well. But for the ones that were built in the 70s, they were actually built as model homes. So the ranch, when initially constructed, was meant to be a model home. Judging from this aerial image of the lots, when I roamed across the surroundings like a mile in each direction, either my house was a one-off style, or if there had been others like it, they were changed in the 50 years since it was originally built. The private street was hard to see for most of the time because it really looked like an alley. When you approached it, you had a house on the corner, but on the opposite side of the little street, it was a fence. So it looked like you were going down an alleyway in Minneapolis. I was out in Minnesota earlier this summer and took this quick video illustrating just the general weirdness of the street when you approached it. When I moved in, this whole main road, which was like Candlestick Road, Candlewood Lane, I don't know. It had a candle name in it. The whole road was under construction to the point that they were actually tearing out the entire road and putting all new asphalt in, which was great because who doesn't love a new road, especially when it's one you don't have to pay for. But this was a city-owned road. My street was different because it was the private road and it fell under the HOA that I belonged to. The HOA agreement was from the 70s and it was pretty dated, and it was very vague about what it actually did. Namely, it just seemed to cover some sort of maintenance for the sidewalk behind my house, which didn't make sense because after that first winter, no one shoveled the sidewalk or anything, so I didn't know what $35 a month was actually going toward. In reality, the HOA was actually responsible for the snow removal on our road, on our street, and then any maintenance that it required. At one of the 3 meetings that was held during my tenure at the ranch, we found out that if we wanted the city to take over our roads so that they could plow it, they had to redo our road. And that was going to be an assessment of $18,000 per house, and then the city would widen the road to a standard 20 feet. Our road was only like 11 feet wide. So if the city expanded it to 20 feet, it would literally take away all of our driveways. We would just be garage doors on the curb. If we wanted to repave the road ourselves, we would also have to pay for that because there was not enough money in the HOA fund to cover it. So we dealt with a shitty pothole-filled road. The first summer they cold patched it, which is worthless. And then the second summer they came and laid tar, and that was pretty worthless as well. And you can never ever park on it because you would be towed. And there were signs everywhere: we will tow you if you park on the road. Yeah, it was something. The former owner of my house, his wife was the HOA president. And apparently everyone hated her. Not in a defund the HOA way. They hated her, I guess, because she was just a total bully in the neighborhood. And according to the woman that lived next door to me, a raging bitch.
I'm Betsy Faye Sharon, and I'm a bitch. Now get out of here.
I can attest to this because when I moved in, I could not figure out for the life of me how to actually pay the HOA fee. There were no instructions at all on how to pay for it because it was not included in my monthly mortgage payment. So I looked through all my paperwork, I reached out to the title company, they found a phone number that was associated with it, and they were like, oh, this is the phone number, you can just call them, ask how to do this. So I did, not knowing that it was her cell phone number. So when she answered, I introduced myself. I said, this is Sean Parker. I recently purchased this house. I'm not sure how to pay for the HOA fee. And she just snaps at me. Just walk to Alan's house at blah blah address and just hand him the check. Don't call me again. And hangs up the phone. And that was it. Needless to say, when I moved out, I wrote a very detailed letter to the new owner explaining how to pay the HOA bill, which included email addresses, phone numbers, and then the physical address of the HOA president's house, because I am such a caring person. In terms of neighbors, they were fine, but they were not anybody I would ever remotely even slightly consider to be my friends. There was a lady, the front of my house faced hers. She said hello to me one time ever. It was a full year after I bought the house, and she kind of came around the corner when I was doing yard work, and I caught her off guard, and she said hi, and I said hello, and she introduced herself and then said, I have a mental block about looking at this house because I hated the bitch that lived here so much. Sorry that I've never said hi, but she was just a horrible woman, and I have it blocked out. And I was like, okay. I don't know what to say to that, but okay, I'm not a woman, and I've lived here for a year now, so it's fine. And that was the only conversation we ever had because she sold her house 2 months later, and then the new people that moved in, I never talked to them either because they wouldn't look over at me. On the other side of me, where the back of my house faced theirs, it was a lovely family from South Africa, and I only ever learned the husband's name, and it was Coffee. He was an unfailingly kind man who always waved. His wife always waved, and then their 3 or 4 kids. I couldn't determine because neighborhood kids would go over there too, but their 3 or 4 kids, they always waved. They were always very polite, and I really appreciated that. At the HOA meetings, the neighbors would all talk about wanting to get together and do these things, and they'd share phone numbers, and I'd get their phone numbers, and then I'd message people to try and jumpstart some sort of a friendship or camaraderie, whatever. No one ever answered me, so it was just kind of, no one wanted anything to do with anyone, and subsequently, I learned to not want anything to do with anyone. But at the HOA meetings, they made sure to complain about the woman that lived in the house before me. Sidebar. I found out that when the new HOA president took over, he revealed that the former owners of my house had been dipping from the pot. So they would use the HOA fund to go on these lavish dinners, they would buy these bogus office supplies, they would buy gift cards for some unknown reason, and at the end when they moved, this left about $1,500 in the HOA bank account. And what's hilarious is that this is all totally legal because their names were on the bank account. Bank said there's no legal standing. You can't do anything about this. They were taking money from a bank account that they had their names on. And that was why we could not afford to replace our own road because we just didn't have the money. And because of this, we did have to vote that the HOA payment went up from $35 to $50 a month. Big whoop, we had to rebuild the coffers in the bank account. It was not all bad. Here are a couple of the nice things about living there. It was an 8-minute commute for me to get to work, which was also great because it required no driving on the highways. And also, it was just It was quiet. It was unnervingly quiet in that neighborhood. Being a private road, there were no cars idling outside of my house. There were really no cars driving up and down the road anyway, because it wasn't a through street. So the only cars that came through were the people that lived there. My neighbor Coffee, they had a trampoline in the backyard, so you could hear the kids jumping on the trampoline and, you know, laughing and stuff. And a couple times it was a little annoying because there was a lot of like screaming going on with the kids, but in general, it is a happy sound, so that was fine too. But more than anything else, it was safe. It was safe enough living there that I did not feel the need to install an alarm system at the ranch because I didn't need it. I still locked my doors every time I left the house, but I didn't need an alarm system. So now let's talk about the ranch.
Oh, thank God.
I will fill in the blanks as much as I possibly can since the listing photos were garbage and I really don't have many before photos. So a few of the rooms are missing. We'll also discuss the inspection that I had, you know, the one where they found that nothing was wrong with the house, which, you know, well, that was not quite the case. Starting with the front. The driveway is 5 cars wide and it is a single car deep. It was ugly, but it was handy because when I had friends over, they could park there, and that, you know, since they weren't allowed to park in the street. The former owner of the house, who I think his name was Mike owned the house for about 14 years before he sold it, and I assume he's the one that put this driveway in. Me without a snowblower, it was awful to shovel this in the winter. The fence on the far left was mine. It had double doors so that Mike could park, I assume, a boat in the side yard next to the garage. On the near side of the garage, there was the crappy fence that is mostly missing. You'll notice the posts that are jutting out. And this is because it's the law in Brooklyn Park that you must conceal your garbage and recycling cans from view of the street. And I guess this was sufficient for that. In the bottom of the image, there was a small flower bed that had one massive, unruly rose-ish bush in it, which was the only plant in the front yard. Moving up the walkway, there was no landscaping apart from the rocks. Lots of rocks. This side of the house faced south, essentially in full sun all day, dusk to dawn. Everything was faded, from the siding to the fencing to the concrete. It was just dry and old. In the front yard over the next 2 years, I would be painting all of the siding, staining the brick columns on the sides of the front door, painting the storm door and the house door, painting the gutters and the fascia up above everything that connected to the roof. I'd paint the garage door, all of the trim, and the fence. I'd remove the railing on the front stoop, patch the broken concrete, and stain all of that. I would plant my favorite tall grass, Carl Forster, all along the front of the house, along with some little flowers that died pretty quickly, and then all of that rock would get covered in mulch. Toward the garage, the fencing and bare posts were going to be removed, as I prefer to keep my garbage and recycling cans in the garage so that I don't have to trek outside in the wintertime to, you know, get rid of trash and recycling. And then the whole side of the garage would be landscaped with bushes and mulch and all that stuff too. Front bed with the bush would be eventually stripped and a tree would be planted in its place. In the backyard, on the right, you can see the shed or outbuilding that was built. This was built on top of where the former owner at one point had a hot tub, but replaced it with this. It had power inside, and it was one of the few places for storage at the ranch. But it was a dumb thing to build where they did because it completely cut off the side yard. You had maybe 2 feet between that and the fence on one side to get down it, and that was the pathway that I normally took, which was like barely wide enough for the lawnmower to fit through. And then on the other side, which is visible here, it was maybe a 1.5 feet wide, and it was always filled with spider webs and some weeds. The sliding door on the left in this photo leads into the living room and dining area of the house, and on the right, that sliding door leads into the primary bedroom suite. This detail is what makes the house a California ranch, as this creates the U shape around the back deck. I'm unsure when the deck was added. There was definitely a patio that you could see between the slats on it, but I don't know how big that patio actually was. There was also an outdoor fireplace built into the massive chimney stack on the back of the house, though I never used it and just had some outdoor candles inside of the nook. Back here, I would repaint all of the siding, I would stain the brick chimney, power wash the deck, and then stain it, and then, of course, paint the fence. Had I stayed in the ranch, stayed living there were really some endless possibilities about what you could have done with that backyard, because the U shape, like, while I didn't love this house at all, there were a lot of things you could have done, and I'm curious about what I would have developed over time with that backyard. A little hair just flew up. But that's a lot, you know, that's for the new owner to decide, and I know she's done a great job on things already because I am in contact with her, which is pretty cool. Further around the back, there had been another shed when I moved in. I had taken pictures of it so that I could put them on Craigslist to get rid of it for free, And long story short right now, someone showed up at the house when I was at work and essentially stole the shed. So I tried to find the Craigslist ad. I did find it. The pictures don't exist on it any longer, unfortunately. That shed was built on a deck, so in this photo, this was taken after the deck had been removed. There were super long flower beds in this part of the backyard that ran the length of the fence, and those were to be torn out as well since they were just full of weeds and the wood was all rotting. I would paint the fence here, plant new grass, paint the house, stain the brick, and just generally clean this mess up. I hated the trees along the back of the house, those arborvitaes, because they just dropped dead crap all the time on the rocks underneath them, and it always looked yellow and gross. I do know that the new owner though has chopped all of those trees down and has done like this really neat, raised garden beds and stuff in that backyard. So she's done a really great job. So let's go inside. Before listing the house, the previous owners had the entire place sprayed in white paint. This wasn't a bad thing because it was a fresh slate for everything. And the only reason I knew that they had done this was because in every room, you could tell in some places what the old color had been. This was not to say that they did a bad job by any means. There was no overspray on the windows or on the trim work, so it was very tidy. There were just a few spots where when I was repainting the walls, you could see what that color had been. The massive open concept space for this house was nice in some regards and just crap in others. It was nice that you could have the TV on and listen to music or a movie while you did kitchen work. Bad in the sense that there was no definition of space and it just felt like a big run-on sentence. I am not a huge fan of open concept spaces, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with them. I just enjoy more defined spaces for decorating. I like that little bit of separation. Not that everything needs to be like a tiny room that's all connected. I just want defined areas, I guess. This house did not have that in the main space. The laminate flooring was not good, and over the years it had chipped and worn down so that when you walked across the house, the floor bounced and the ductwork underneath it rattled. The living room would go through 2 color stories, first being painted dark green and then an off-white. In addition to the walls being painted, all the trim would be painted, drapery rods installed, and the fireplace would get a complete makeover. The brick would be painted, shiplap would be built over the mantle, and then speaking of the mantle, that tiny concrete shelf would be replaced, or not really replaced, but covered by a custom wood mantle made of barnwood, courtesy of my dad. I would also be replacing all of the electrical outlets and light switches. Turning around into the kitchen, a lot more would happen. You'll notice all the ceilings are popcorn ceilings, that lovely, illustrious product of the 70s. Let it be known that I didn't touch it in any of the rooms. I didn't want to. I know it was technically easy to remove, and the process is a bit messy, but not necessarily long and tedious, but I just didn't care enough. And neither did the previous owner. You could see the shadows in the ceiling of how the kitchen used to be laid out. I can only guess that the big window on the left used to be much smaller, seeing as all of the windows in the house were in the 10-ish year old range. But where that window so unceremoniously cuts into the kitchen counter, there used to be a peninsula there, and likely no kitchen island at all. And now from a distance, the cabinetry looks fine. Up close, it was not. The island itself was composed of upper cabinets that had probably been purchased from a place like Restore, where people, gut out their properties and bring stuff to Restore so it could be sold to someone, new that's working on a budget. But the bottoms were cut off of these upper cabinets so that they would match the same height of like the lower cabinets. The countertop, which was broken in the middle and bowed, was put on, and electrical was fed inside. And you couldn't fit anything in this stupid thing for storage. Each of the cabinets, they were so shallow, you couldn't fit full-size pots and pans inside, so those had to be stored elsewhere in the house. So that would be the first to go, and replaced by a custom island built by my father with a white oak top that was also reclaimed from a barn. For the walls, all that penny tile would eventually come down, replaced with just sheetrock. The sink was described as a chef's sink, but really it just pissed me off because the bottom of it was not sloped for drainage. So any time that I used the sink, or anyone used the sink, you had to take the handle down and rinse it out, otherwise the food would just sit and dry and then crust onto the metal. So you'd have to take that metal rack out of the bottom, scrub the whole thing down. It was just good idea in theory of what it looked like, and I don't think this was the previous owner's fault. The thing was just built with no slope toward the drain. Other things in here, I would modify the cabinet to the left of the oven and trim off part of the counter. Paint all the cabinets, paint the walls, remove the cabinet above the fridge because it was too low to fit any kind of a modern fridge underneath it. I would remove the door that hid the basement stairs, widen the opening, and then knock a hole in the wall over the stairwell to open it up. I would replace the oven and the fridge, the latter of which was also from a dent and ding kind of situation because the whole top on the back of it was crushed down as if it had fallen off of a truck. For the pantry, which was probably a coat closet originally, I would gut the entire thing and rebuild it all since it was arranged in some bullshit way with random pieces of wood and a weird shelving unit that was probably a bathroom medicine cabinet originally. All of the electrical outlets would be replaced because none of them were GFCI protected, and the light switches would be replaced as well as all of the lighting. The house had two wings that created the California Ranch shape. There was the east wing where the guest bedroom, the office, and the guest bath were located off of the living room, and then there was the west wing which was located off of the kitchen, and that had the primary suite in it. The east wing of the house was tricky because the two bedrooms that were at that end switched places during my tenure at the ranch. Originally, my office was in the northeast corner, the guest bedroom was in the southeast. But a year and a half in, I had a roommate, so my office became his office, the guest bedroom became my office, and then the basement became the new guest bedroom. And this will all make a lot more sense when we get to the basement portion of things. But I'll just say these were the things that I did in those rooms since there are really no before pictures of them. Both bedrooms were painted, and within a year they were repainted because I just didn't like the colors that I chose. And for those counting, yes, I did repaint half the house after a year because of poor color choices. And that is what happens when you don't have a plan. In these rooms, apart from the walls being painted, the trim was all painted, the closet doors were painted. In one of the rooms, the closet doors were replaced. There was new window hardware added, plus all outlets and switches replaced. I didn't touch the ceiling fans in either room. They were super old, they were super ugly. I just never got around to doing it. Connecting the bedrooms was the hallway, which was painted top to bottom as well. And between the bedrooms was the guest bathroom. This one had some stuff to do inside. Apart from replacing the toilet with its awesome cushioned seat, round bowl, and low height, I would be trying my hand at board and batten for the first time. This works when you have a wall that has no texture on it because you can just add wood trim to it and call it good. Otherwise, you've got to add panels to the wall to cover the texture, which I got very well versed in doing in this house, so trust me that I speak from experience. If you have a smooth wall, you're good to go. But the board and batten in here later inspired me to add it to the guest room and the office as well, which I neglected to mention before because I'm an idiot. Could I go back and add it in so that I come across as collected and smart? Sure I could, but here we are and there I was, and this is why we can't have nice things. The bathroom would be painted, of course, plus a new mirror, new lighting, a new shower head, the board and batten that I mentioned, and as I said, a new toilet. It did have a retro heat lamp in the ceiling, and I'm not gonna lie, that thing was pretty awesome, because in the winter, when it was kind of chilly on that end of the house, because it was the farthest from the furnace in the basement, if you were taking a shower, turning that heat lamp on just like added to the experience and made it, one, it had like the sexy red glow to it, but also it was just cozy and warm, so people in the 70s, they knew a little bit about what they were doing. In the West Wing, we have the primary bedroom suite. I mentioned before that before the house was listed for sale, the whole place was painted white. Unlike in the Manor, where I was painting over these crazy Crayola crayon colors, bringing it from something really ugly into something that I considered pretty. This house was such a blank slate that I really don't feel bad that I don't have a ton of before photos of just white rooms. In the primary bedroom, I do have this single picture where I was holding Paolo hostage for a photo in the mirrored closet doors. For this bedroom, I would be painting the walls, all the trim, and then installing a full wall of board and batten behind the headboard. A new drapery rod over the sliding doors to the deck, new outlets and switches, and eventually entirely new doors for the closets in the room, which were a nightmare to install, and that is absolutely not my forte. Now it's the big one, the primary bath. This was the first time that I actually gutted a room to the studs and then got to redesign it from the ground up. The primary bath back in the 90s was actually two spaces, which I discovered when I took the sheetrock down. I could see the framing for where a second door had once been and where a dividing wall had been between the two spaces. So where the bathtub currently existed, that had probably been like a half bath, And then where the shower stall was, that had probably been a walk-in closet. The primary bathroom was the last project that I undertook in the house, as it was the biggest, but it was one that I had fantasized about from the day I purchased the ranch. I wanted to remove the jetted bathtub and put a double vanity in its place. The toilet, when I moved in, was at an angle so that you wouldn't back into it when standing at the teeny tiny sink console. So that would go away, the toilet would be straightened out, and then finally, instead of the awkward corner shower stall, that entire wall would become a walk-in shower with a divider wall separating it from the toilet. New electrical entirely, new plumbing entirely, a new exhaust fan, new mirrors, flooring, paint, trim. It was a huge process, and it was one that kicked off the exquisite pain of me definitely knowing that I had carpal tunnel in my right hand. Now we come to the basement, but first, why home inspections are sometimes worthless. I mentioned in the last video that the home inspector that I had hired only found one problem with the house, which was a crack in the chimney crown or cap or whatever you want to call it, and some loose bricks around it. Because of what he found, the sellers knocked $5,000 off the house for me because it would be kind of expensive to fix. Ultimately, I never fixed it, and when I sold the ranch, I also knocked money off when the purchaser had a inspector find problems with that as well. The problem with my inspection was that there were two other issues that he completely missed. Both of them were in the basement, and both of them had been checked by him. First, there was the basement half bathroom, which he marked on the form fully functional.
Specifically,
That the toilet was fully functional. Oddly enough, when I moved in, the water to the toilet was turned off. It clearly had not been filled in years, so when I turned the water on, the water never stopped running, and the toilet didn't stop leaking, so the toilet was broken. Water got turned off, it got drained. The other thing was the water heater. It was marked on the form as older, but in good condition.
however,
A week after moving in, rusty water was running all over the basement. So I had the gas company come out because I had a home insurance thing with them on appliances, and the guy that came out looked inside the water heater, just like the control panel area, I think, and immediately he says, "Did your inspector not look at this at all? The entire thing is rusted out. This is shot. It's done." So that was $1,200 that I had to drop literally 9 days into owning the house. It should be noted that every time I wanted to look at the house, previous owners needed like really advanced notification. You couldn't see it day of. I don't have any proof of this. My realtor and I both believe it though, that it was because they were going to the house to clean up any water that had leaked out of the water heater, so they were hiding it. Again, I don't have proof of that, but I do believe it. We tried going after the former owners because they had concealed the leak, but they refused to do anything about it. This was spearheaded by their agent, who I've mentioned before, and he just said, "You had an inspection, we already knocked stuff off, they didn't find this, so we're not responsible for it." I could have sued them. Is it worth it to do that? There's no guarantee that you're gonna make money off of that, and in the end, like, the stress of suing someone, like, just forget it. Just forget it, move on. So case in point, sometimes your inspector catches stuff, sometimes your inspector does not catch stuff, and in the end, you were the one paying $300 for something that could be worthless. Proceed at your own risk. But the basement, anyway, the basement. So obviously it had been finished at one point in time. When that was, the world may never know, but I wanted to finish it again. To get there, that meant painting the dingy beige paint and essentially gray ceiling because it was so filthy. New lighting, outlets, switches, and then carpet. Was it risky to put carpeting in a basement with no sump pump in the Midwest? Yes. Yes, it was. However, I had gone through part of a summer, a full winter, and then an entire summer before I installed the carpet. There was never a drop of water down there. It was fine. So I went ahead. And then due to a, shall we say, shitty situation, 3 weeks after the carpet was installed, it all had to be torn out. The sheetrock had to be torn out. And then professionals had to come to refinish what had already been done in the basement. In addition to all this other stuff, I refinished the half bath as well, painting it with a new vanity, a new sink, new mirror, new lighting, new electrical, new switches. The stairs to the basement were refinished as well, pulling off the teal colored carpet and painting the wood stairs underneath them before installing a cool vintage printed runner. And that was really it when it comes to the plan. And I say plan loosely because it was all very slapdash, spur of the moment.
I'm gonna do this.
And then regret what I did and have to redo it. There were other issues to resolve along the way, including the electrical panel in the basement that had several breakers that were double tapped, existing plumbing issues that needed to be corrected to be up to code, the furnace crapping out 2 winters in a row, and then the general storage issues that I had in the house. On top of that, I had some very serious health issues, including kidney stones that required multiple surgeries, a stress disorder, and an eventual false diagnosis of an autoimmune disorder, and just massive changes in my life altogether. But we're going to cover most, if not all of that, over the next 2 months, and you are going to be so impressed by all of it. Trust me, I wouldn't. And that is all I have got right now. Thank you so much for watching today as we went through the brief bullshit history of the ranch and then walked through all of the work that I was going to take on in order to bring it from the drab mid-century house that it was and into the modern day gem that it turned out to be. If you have questions or comments on anything you saw in the video today, please leave them below and I will be happy to answer them as soon as I can. While you're at it, go ahead and click the like button, it helps me out. And if you haven't already, click the subscribe button because it helps you out. That way you'll be reminded every Wednesday morning when a new video drops, like next week when we go through the very first room that had any work done to it, the living room, in episode 18 of Restoring Sean. Until then, take care and I will see you soon.